As we await President Biden in Israel, since we last spoke on the show this morning, East Coast time, there's a little bit more of a development around what intel the president was basing his the other team comment regarding this explosion at the hospital. What can you tell us?
Right. Well, the president had initially said it appears the other team did this. He wasn't any more specific than that, what he meant by which team. But what we now know is that the president, when pressed on this, said he had viewed intelligence provided to him by the U.S. Pentagon, by the Department of Defense. So that implies this is not solely based on those Israeli intercepts that were made public by the IDF of phone calls from militants from a group called Islamic Jihad, which is a militant group that fights alongside Hamas, but it's not technically part of it. We haven't seen that declassified intelligence if they are working to declassify it, but you can imagine that the president will have to explain more of why he is landing in Israel amid this outcry that we are seeing in the surrounding area.
And there's a question of whether any kind of intelligence will change the narrative as it already exists, right? We're agonizing over the details. What can we know? And yet, even if the intelligence says one thing, will the wider world believe it? That's an open question.
Right.
Talk about the fallout, if you will, already about following this explosion at the hospital and the hundreds dead.
Right. And it's not just the explosion, as horrific as it is to see a hospital targeted in a civilian area. We talked about the death toll from that disgusting attack by Hamas in Israel. But according to the Gazan authorities, there are 3,000 Palestinian dead in the Gaza Strip. They claim 12,000 people have been injured in the past 11 days. So those numbers, well, we can't verify them any more than we can go and verify any battlefield or bombing death independently. That is what the Arab world is seeing, that there appears to be a different response to loss of life and a criticism that this is not proportionate force. So there's a pressure on the president from King Abdullah, from other Arab leaders, to stand up there and say, let's have a ceasefire. Let's have a cessation of violence. He has not said that.
Yeah, Margaret, we're glad you're joining us here at the desk. We'll check back in with you in a second. Senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams is in Tel Aviv right now. Holly, good morning.
Good morning, Nate. This trip is essentially a massive show of support for Israel by President Biden. He's met today not just with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his emergency war cabinet, but also with Israeli first responders and even with a survivor of the massacre. Earlier today, President Biden said to Netanyahu, quote, "I want you to know you're not alone. We will continue to have Israel's back as you work to defend your people."
I wanted to be here today.
Are we now hearing from President Biden?
I think we might be, Holly. Control, is this a live picture we have now? No, we are not. We are not, Holly. Forgive us.
It's not, okay.
This is earlier, yeah.
I'm sorry about that. I could hear President Biden in my voice. Yeah, so look, what we've been hearing from some Israelis over the last few days is that President Biden is showing the kind of leadership that they would like to see from Prime Minister Netanyahu. And they point to President Biden's speech last week when he called the attack by Hamas, quote, pure, unadulterated evil. Now, the US is already surging munitions to its ally, and with a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip expected in the days ahead, Israel's requested another $10 billion in emergency military aid from the US. Many people here blame their own government for the apparent security failures that allowed Hamas militants to go on that bloody rampage.
All right, Holly Williams, of course, we'll get back to you in just a second. Thank you so much. Margaret, you know, we keep talking about the blame game on either sides for the attack of the hospital. But what does either side have to gain by bombing a hospital full of civilians? That's why this makes no sense. And certainly, why would Israel or anyone, Israel in particular, bomb a hospital when you know the United States president is coming there to an active war zone?
Right. Why would that be a strategic choice?
Exactly.
That doesn't seem to be a rational choice, right? So that is
on their side or the militant group side.
Right. Certainly not on Hamas's side. There was this intercept that the IDF, the Israeli military, released saying that they had evidence of communications between some of the fighters realizing they had made a mistake and that it wasn't an intentional bombing.
But that's a hell of a mistake, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I would think that everybody would...
We can't verify that.
Everybody would dot all their I's and cross all their T's, especially during this time.
These rockets routinely fall short. It's a common occurrence in the conditions that they're
These are militants. These are terrorists. This is not the Israeli military, which has precision bombs and one of the most sophisticated and well-financed and well-supported militaries in the world.
We see the president approaching the microphone. We'll go straight to him now.
I come to Israel with a single message. You're not alone. You are not alone. As long as the United States stands, and we will stand forever, we'll not let you ever be alone. Most importantly, I know the recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. More than 1,300 innocent Israelis killed, including at least 31 American citizens by the terrorist group Hamas. Hundreds of young people at a music festival. The festival was for peace, gunned down as they ran for their lives. Scores of innocents, from infants to elderly grandparents, Israelis and Americans, taken hostage. Children slaughtered, babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Rape, beheadings, bodies burned alive. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world. There's no rationalizing it, no excusing it, period. The brutality we saw would have cut deep anywhere in the world, but it cuts deeper here in Israel. October 7th, which was a sacred Jewish holiday, became the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It has brought to the surface painful memories and scars left by millennia of anti-Semitism and the genocide of the Jewish people. The world watched then, it knew, and the world did nothing. We will not stand by and do nothing again. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. To those who are living in limbo, waiting desperately to learn the fate of a loved one, especially to families of the hostages, you're not alone. We're working with partners throughout the region, pursuing every avenue to bring home those who are being held captive by Hamas. I can't speak publicly about all the details, but let me assure you, for me, as the American president, there's no higher priority than the release and safe return of all these hostages. To those who are grieving, a child, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, I know you feel like there's that black hole in the middle of your chest. You feel like you're being sucked into it. The survivor's remorse, the anger, the questions of faith in your soul, staring at that empty chair, sitting Shiva, the first Sabbath without them. They're the everyday things, the small things that you miss the most. The scent when you open the closet door. The morning coffee you shared together. The bend of his smile, the perfect pitch of her laugh. The giggle of your little boy, the baby. For those who have lost loved ones, this is what I know. They'll never be truly gone. There's something that's never fully lost. Your love for them and their love for you. And I promise you, you'll be walking along some days and say, what would she or he want me to do? You smile when you pass a place that reminds you of them. That's when you know. When a smile comes to your lips before a tear to your eye, that's when you know you're going to fully make it. That's what will give you the fortitude to find light in the darkest hours. When terrorists believe they could bring you down, bend your will, break your resolve. But they never did, and they never will. Instead, we saw incredible stories of heroism and courage, of Israelis taking care of one another, neighbors forming watch groups to protect their kibbutz, opening their homes to shelter survivors, retired soldiers running into danger once again, civilian medics flying across rescue missions, and off-duty medics at the music festival caring for the wounded before becoming a victim himself. Volunteers retrieving bodies of the dead so families could bury their loved ones in accordance with Jewish tradition. Reservists leaving behind their families, their honeymoons, their studies abroad without hesitation, and so much more. The state of Israel was born to be a safe place for the Jewish people of the world. That's why I was born. I've long said If Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. While it may not feel that way today, Israel must again be a safe place for the Jewish people. And I promise you, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that it will be. 75 years ago, just 11 minutes after its founding, President Harry S. Truman and the United States of America became the first nation to recognize Israel. We've stood by your side ever since. We're going to stand by your side now. My administration was in close touch with your leadership from the first moments of this attack. We're going to make sure we have what you need to protect your people, to defend your nation. For decades, we've ensured Israel's qualitative military edge. And later this week, I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense. We're going to keep Iron Dome fully supplied so it can continue standing sentinel over Israeli skies, saving Israeli lives. We've moved U.S. military assets to the region, including positioning the USS Ford Carrier Strike Group in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the USS Eisenhower on the way to defer further aggression against Israel and to prevent this conflict from spreading. The world will know that Israel is stronger than ever. And my message to any state or any other hostile actor thinking about attacking Israel remains the same as it was a week ago. Don't. Since this terrorist attack took place, we've seen it described as Israel's 9/11. But for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s. The scale may be different, but I'm sure those horrors have tapped into some kind of primal feeling in Israel, just like it did and felt in the United States. Shock, pain, rage, an all-consuming rage. I understand, and many Americans understand. You can't look at what has happened here to your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, sons, daughters, children, even babies, and not scream out for justice. Justice must be done. But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. I'm the first U.S. president to visit Israel in time of war. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership. There's always cost, but it requires being deliberate. It requires asking very hard questions. It requires clarity about the objectives and an honest assessment about whether the path you're on will achieve those objectives. The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy. The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today, I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. Let me be clear. If Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid. We're working in close cooperation with the government of Egypt the United Nations and its agencies like the World Food Program and other partners in the region to get trucks moving across the border as soon as possible. Separately, I ask Israel that the global community demand that the International Red Cross be able to visit hostages. I just demanded that the United States fully supports. Today, I'm also announcing $100 million in new U.S. funding for humanitarian assistance in both Gaza and the West Bank. This money will support more than 1 million displaced and conflict-affected Palestinians, including emergency needs in Gaza. You are a Jewish state. You are a Jewish state, but you're also a democracy. And like the United States, you don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law. And when conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. Israeli, Palestinian, Arab, Jew, Muslim, Christian, everyone. You can't give up what makes you who you are. If you give that up, then the terrorists win, and we can never let them win. You know, Israel's a miracle, a triumph of faith and resolve and resilience over impossible pain and loss. Think about October 7th, the Jewish holiday, where you read about the death of Moses, a tragic story of a profound loss to an entire nation. A death that could have left hopelessness in the hearts of the entire nation. But though Moses died, his memory, his message, his lessons have lived on for generations of the Jewish people as well as many others. And just as the memory of your loved ones will live on as well. After reading the story of Moses' death, those who observed the holiday began reading the Torah from the very beginning. The story of creation reminds us of two things. First, that when we get knocked down, we get back up again, and we begin anew. And second, when we're faced with tragedy and loss, we must go back to the beginning and remember who we are. We are all human beings, created in the image of God with dignity, humanity, and purpose. In the darkness, to be the light unto the world is what we're about. You inspire hope and light for so many around the world. That's what the terrorists seek to destroy. That's what they seek to destroy. Because they live in darkness, but not you, not Israel. Nations of conscience like the United States and Israel are not measured solely by the example or power, and we're measured by the power of our example. That's why, as hard as it is, we must keep pursuing peace. We must keep pursuing a path so that Israel and the Palestinian people can both live safely, in security, in dignity, and in peace. For me, that means a two-state solution. We must keep working for Israel's greater integration with its neighbors. These attacks have only strengthened my commitment and determination and my will to get that done. I'm here to tell you, the terrorists will not win. Freedom will win. So let me end where I began. Israel, you're not alone. The United States stands with you. I've told the story before, and I'll tell it again, of my first meeting with an Israeli prime minister 50 years ago as a young senator. I was sitting across from Golda Meir at her desk in her office. And she had a guy who later became prime minister, sitting next to me, just before the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And she flipped the maps up and down, telling me how bad things were and how terrible they were. All of a sudden, she looked at me and she said, "Would you like a photograph?" I looked at her. She got up from her desk and walked out into that hallway. I think it's marble flooring. Walked out in the hallway. We walked out and there were a bunch of photographers standing in front of us. We were standing shoulder to shoulder. Without her looking at me, she said to me, knowing I'd hear her, "Why do you look so worried, Senator Biden?" And I said, "Worried? Like, of course I'm worried." And she looked at me and she didn't look. She said, "Don't worry, Senator. We Israelis have a secret weapon. We have nowhere else to go." Well, today, I say to all of Israel, the United States isn't going anywhere either. We're going to stand with you. We'll walk beside you in those dark days, and we'll walk beside you in the good days to come, and they will come. As you say in Hebrew, which I'm not going to attempt to do because I'm such a terrible linguist, I'll say it in English. The people of Israel live. The people of Israel live. Israel will be safe, secure, Jewish, and democratic state today, tomorrow, and forever. May God protect all those who work for peace. God save those who are still in harm's way. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, what is your red line that would prompt U.S. military involvement in this war?
You have been listening to President Joe Biden deliver remarks in Israel after meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, first American president to visit Israel during wartime. And a speech there with messages for numerous audiences. First for Israel, saying you are not alone, but also a warning for Israel not to be consumed by anger or by hate. We are joined here at the table again by Margaret Brennan, and we've got our reporters in the field. Margaret, I saw you taking notes as furiously as the rest of us. Yeah. What stood out to you?
Well, a number of things. The first order of business was for him to reach out to the Israeli public as he did and said, I'm with you. And then he quickly moved on to addressing the strike, said that strike on that Gaza hospital was the work of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. That was a U.S. assessment. He put that aside. And what you put your finger on, I thought, was very powerful. That pivot he made to calling on the better angels of the nature of the democratic state of Israel to say, don't be consumed by rage. He compared it to the mistakes the United States made after 9/11 with overreach. And I don't even have to go into laying out all of what was learned over the past decades.
But he also said justice must be done. I thought that was interesting. He said justice must be done, but you have to be deliberate.
Yes.
And you have to be, it almost sounds like he was calling for restraint, but not calling for restraint.
Bingo. Exactly what I thought. It was as close to calling for restraint as he could. He said, you as a democracy live by the fundamental dignity of human life. You are not a terror group. Yes. So for those who say eye for an eye, he is saying you are held to a higher standard and you must hold yourselves. Yeah. And that was an elegant way of saying, be careful, slow down.
And as he said, justice, must be done. My thought was peace needs to come before justice. And what does peace look like moving forward while we are in the midst of this war happening on a daily basis?
The fog is so thick, I don't know anyone can see it.
Well, he did make reference to the U.S. policy of standing by a two-state solution. That is the belief that Palestinians have a fundamental right to self-determination. Right. But that is not the policy of many Republican presidential candidates right now. That is not the policy of the Prime Minister of Israel right now, or the cabinet that he had put together before this war cabinet. So that is actually, in some ways, a farther off solution on the horizon. But it's worth reminding people that the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, and there is rage there about what is happening in Gaza.
He had messages in that speech to the Palestinian people as well. And I think in particular when he made reference to Israel as a country of laws, including the laws of war. That is obviously a point of furious debate right now of whether Israel's gone beyond those laws or outside of them currently. And he's hoping, I'm sure, Gail, I know we're going to go to Imtiaz, that the Palestinians listening to that speech will also take a step back.
Yeah, he had something for everyone in that speech. We want to go now to Imtiaz Tayyab. He's in East Jerusalem. He's been covering that hospital bombing in Gaza and the reaction from around the region. Imtiaz, good morning to you. What did you hear?
Good morning, Gail. Well, I think for those Palestinians who are out on the streets, for those who are out protesting all across the region, they did not hear what they wanted to hear, which was President Biden condemn the violence inside the Gaza Strip. We've been seeing protests in cities like Beirut, outside the U.S. Embassy, massive protests out there. And the reason they're protesting specifically outside the U.S. Embassy is because they believe that because the U.S., because the president hasn't condemned the the kind of violence that we've been seeing inside Gaza, that in some ways the U.S. is condoning the violence in Gaza. Now, as we've been saying, President Biden, in that very wide-ranging speech, was really trying to speak to everybody there. But I think when we look at those images of those protests all across the region here, that few people heard that and are still extraordinarily angry, not only at what happened at that hospital, but the fact that over the last 11 days, over 3,000 Palestinians have been killed.
But Imtiaz, just, you say Palestinians will not hear what they wanted to hear. But, Joe Biden did say that the United States stands unequivocally opposed to civilian deaths in war, and there was an offer of money, aid, to ease the burden and the suffering. Why, in your view, I know you're in East Jerusalem there, heavily Palestinian area, why might those words fall short or ring hollow for Palestinians?
And he also said that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. I thought that was a very key phrase and a very key message that he was sending.
Yes.
And I think it's a phrase that would resonate with many Palestinians who don't see Hamas representing them as well. But I had a conversation with Hanan Ashrawi, who is a very well-known figure, an elder Palestinian stateswoman. And she was in Washington in 1993 on the South Lawn, and that incredible historic moment where you had Bill Clinton standing there with Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, where they shook hands, and it almost seemed as if we were close to Palestinian peace. And here we are now, 30 years later, and Hanan Ashrawi essentially said that she's heard it all before from successive U.S. president. And I asked her, do you have any hope about President Biden's visit? And she said no, she had no hope whatsoever, and that, and I'm quoting here, he should just go home.
All right, Imtiaz, tie up for us. 5,700 miles away back in Washington, D.C., we have Ed O'Keefe, our senior White House and political correspondent, who's also been listening along here. Ed, the president, we've been saying all morning, had a risky and complicated mission there. It may not have been possible to accomplish it. Did he come close?
We'll see. The president was eager to make this trip after being invited by Israeli leadership, and you can see in what he said, especially at the beginning and at the end of this speech, that he wanted to convey these messages to the Israeli people there in Israel. The fact that he's not meeting in person with Arab leaders in Jordan later today, as originally scheduled, will be a disappointment. But he is speaking with the Egyptian and Palestinian leadership on the phone on his flight back. The fact that there is now at least $100 million in U.S. aid for the Palestinian people will be met with immediate opposition up on Capitol Hill from Republicans who've been pretty clear that they don't want to see any aid potentially reach Gaza and reach the Hamas leadership. So we'll wait and see about the details of when that gets there, who exactly gets it, and whether that makes it any easier to bring relief to those civilians. And wait also to see for what exactly he's asking Congress to give in terms of money. Remember, Congress itself isn't quite organized right now. And so the scope and price of that project will probably depend on how quickly Congress can reorganize, at least the House can reorganize, and Republicans signal what they're willing to support.
All right, Ed, you've had the last word on this subject. For now, we'll check in with you, of course, throughout the day. Margaret, we thank you. Imtiaz Tayeb, thank you, too. Our coverage of the president's visit to Israel will continue on CBS News streaming, your local news, and, of course, tonight on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. This has been a CBS News special report here in New York. I'm Gayle King with Tony DeCoppola and Nate Burleson. We'll see you tomorrow.
We are continuing coverage of President Biden's visit to Israel. Moments ago, he made remarks to reporters.
CBS News correspondent Roxana Saberi is in Tel Aviv. She was presumably listening to the president's remarks. Roxana, and I know I'm asking for your takeaways. You're a reporter, but the president's words will have a direct impact on all who have heard them, Israeli and Palestinian. You are in Tel Aviv. What do you think the impact of the president